Welcome to the Media Cat Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pigger, editor at the magazine. And for today's pod, I'd like to welcome the director at Stack Magazines, Stephen Watson. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Just off mic before we started talking, I wanted to leap straight in because you look a bit different to your pictures at the moment. You're sporting a fantastic moustache.
Yeah.
I just want to, literally, before I ask you anything about your job or what you do, I want to ask about that. So what's going on there?
Oh, well, thank you for the kind words. So I guess the moustache came quite early on in lockdown. There was really not very much to do. I wasn't leaving my house and I grew a moustache. And then turns out my kids and my wife really like it. So now I'm just a man with a moustache.
Sounds like the Pedro Pascal story. I think he sort of did a similar thing, maybe for a role. And then everyone just told him, and they were like, actually, you look way better, keep it. And that's how it goes. It's stages of life, right? So I
like to think that I lived the first 40 years of my life without a moustache. And so now hopefully I've got another 40 with a moustache.
Okay, well, you need to update all your pictures online. I know you said you got some exciting moustache pictures, which, I'm waiting with bated breath to see those online somewhere.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It was for a Chinese magazine. They sent Yushi Lee to photograph me, and she's the photographer who's like famous for taking photos that like subvert the male gaze. So she did the series of like my Tinder dates, which is like lots of naked men photographed with hair closed, and then she's done like various things riffing off that. So basically, like she came and photographed me. And I didn't take my clothes off, but she did end up getting me sort of like standing in some bushes with like some flowers kind of draped over my face. So, I mean, they're like really cool images, but not, I don't know. I might not be using that as my main picture for a little while.
That was literally going to be my next question. I was like, hold on a minute, you've got a naked photo shoot. It wasn't.
The world doesn't need to see that.
Well, you never know. Like you said, subverting the gaze and all that. And, why not? Anyway, I should probably get into why I've got you on the podcast. So I thought we could obviously talk about your business, Stack Magazines. So you founded that in 2008, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
How did it come to be? Because, and that's, it's a long time in a role, but I guess if it's your baby, then how did it come to be and sort of what convinced you to sort of make the leap into starting a business?
Well, so I was a magazine editor. At the time, I was editing in-flight magazines and feeling a little bit kind of sort of lost, I suppose, because like editing in-flight magazines is really fun because you get to fly around the place and stay in nice hotels. But it's also a little bit soul-destroying because you're just kind of, you're like producing the same articles for the same kind of like ad-friendly editorial. And I just basically started like reading independent magazines. At the time, my office was on Gray's Inn Road, which was just around the corner from Magma. And I just sort of go in there and like browse the shelves and see these amazing magazines. And I sort of realized that, so like you start seeing like one or two, and then you realize that there's like way more of these things. And I just thought like, wouldn't it be nice to have like a really easy way for people to discover more of these magazines that doesn't like sort of depend on them happening to work around the corner from Magma in Clerkenwell.
That makes sense. So actually, I realized as well, as is my way, jumping around. So you started the business. Can you explain what Stack does? So what's your business when it comes to magazines?
Yeah, sure. So every month we choose a different independent magazine and we deliver it to our subscribers who are all around the world. And you never know what you're going to get next, but it's always going to be one of these lovely, intelligent, beautiful, independent magazines that you probably wouldn't otherwise have come across.
Okay, that sounds good. And I was curious, like how since 2008, obviously, I imagine things have changed quite a lot, sort of within the industry, sort of publications and magazines, and also just the globalization of the world and the internet and things like that. How do you see it having changed from those early days as the business? Has it changed a great deal, or did you always have that kind of business model from the off?
Well, I mean, in the early days, it was sort of a hobby, really. I mean, I guess I did always have the aspiration that it would become, a job. But yeah, for the first few years, I did it and didn't pay myself. I just sort of wanted it to exist, really. Like I was in my sort of like mid to late 20s and having a great time going to independent magazine launch parties and meeting really interesting people. And so that, that was kind of like the sort of motivation. And then my wife gave birth to our first child, and like all my spare time disappeared. And so it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to have to choose now. And by this point, I'd left the job, which was the in-flight magazine editor. And as a result of running Stack, I'd ended up working for this like great creative agency. And so basically, ended up with two jobs that I really liked. But so I had to choose and went with Stack. And that was in 2013.
Okay, so did it sort of start to become a lot more kind of, I don't know, serious in terms of a job then? Like you kind of investing your time in it, etc., or was it very much the same? Or
no, totally. I mean, like it was terrifying. Like it's not it's probably not the most sensible route to go. Like, okay, so we just had a baby, and like now we're actually like things are getting serious. We really need some money. So I tell you, I'm gonna give up the job that pays me money, and I'm gonna go and like try and do this thing that's been my hobby for a few years. But like fortunately, it paid off. It obviously made everything much more serious. But then that kind of like led on to other opportunities because we're like back in the days when I was doing Stack evenings, weekends, and 1 day a week. Like all you can think is like, oh God, imagine if I could do this for 2 days a week. That'd be amazing. Then when you do 2 days a week, like, oh, imagine how to do it 3 days a week. So they're like, at each point you sort of push yourself kind of as far as you can get before you then go like, right, we need to make a change here and in order to kind of like keep moving and keep growing.
So, I mean, what was it like sort of 2008, 9, 10 in terms of, sort of magazine subscription-based services? Were there many people out there sort of doing a similar thing? On, was it very much an education kind of piece of you being like, I do this thing, and everyone's like, oh, okay, I sort of get it? Or, did you have to explain it a lot to people? Or
Yeah. And well, I mean, honestly, like the nice thing about Stack is always when you go, it's a surprise magazine, so you never know what you're going to get. I think there's just something in people that kind of like you get that. Like that's a very simple concept. The thing that's really changed since those days is not so much, I'd say, magazine subscriptions as just kind of like subscriptions as a whole. Like or like recurring revenue model. Basically, like these days you can subscribe and get like, I don't know, bacon delivered, or like you can basically subscribe to sort of anything these days. And like back when I started, that wasn't the case. And so that meant that like just in a really practical way, like there weren't really platforms that I could use to do it. So I just had like 2 janky spreadsheets and like everything ran through PayPal, and it was a bit of a nightmare. But like over the years, that's really developed. And so now we've got like this really lovely subscriptions platform that we run everything through, and like it's all sort of like much smoother, and that side of things is much easier.
Yeah, I guess technology, the internet, and mobile technology as well, just gives people access to all these things that they maybe didn't have before. I suppose linked to that, kind of, how have you seen the sort of desire for print change over that time? Because obviously, I guess the internet had been going, I don't know, about 10 years-ish, maybe, when you sort of started your business. And obviously from that 10 years to the last 15-ish years, it's accelerated in terms of what's available. And then we've swung across to, everything digital, everything online, everything on mobile apps and whatever else. And then that's kind of, and then hit digital fatigue, right? So, kind of going back the other way to things more tangible. Has that kind of played into how you position yourself as a business?
Well, no, sure. Maybe not in terms of how we position ourselves. I think probably, I mean, look, you're absolutely right. Obviously, the internet has changed everything. I think that the first iPad, I think, launched right at the start of 2010. And so, but obviously it was like really being talked about and hyped a lot before then. So like, almost from as soon as I'd started Stack. So we started in December 2008. Almost straight away, everyone was talking about like the tablet, like the iPad, and print is dead. And I remember like going to like, sort of independent magazine conferences and stuff. And literally like the whole thing would be about like print is dead. I guess there was like, there there was always a sense amongst independent magazine makers and readers and fans and stuff that, like, you know, it wasn't just going to die. But there's also like this sort of sense of like, well, how is it not going to die? I mean, are you sure this thing can play video and like music and stuff like that? Seems better. Anyway, obviously we know that iPad sales like grew very fast and then kind of plateaued and then started to drop off. And so that, like, you know, took, say 5 years. And I think kind of like after that sort of curve, there was a greater understanding of like, oh, okay, all right, print isn't just going to like die and go away. That said, I mean, you know, if you are someone who's working on like a national newspaper, you know that people are not reading your newspaper in print in the way that they used to. If you're working on any mainstream magazine, basically barring the news weeklies, you know that people are not reading your magazine in print in the way they used to. So that, you know, on the kind of the mainstream side, I mean, that's had like a huge impact, and there's no way that they're coming back from that. Like, you know, so it's now all about kind of like, how do you manage that kind of decline? On the independent side, like, honestly, independent magazines have never had any money. They've never had a big readership. So it's not like they're kind of like suddenly missing something. But so then the question is more sort of like, okay, well, so what is the function of these magazines in this world? And how do you make someone want to give you a little bit of their time? Because, you know, and again, you say like people live their lives through their phones these days. I know that I'm on my phone quite a lot, and I'm definitely on my computer all the time. So it's like, okay, so how do you carve out that little bit of time that's not that, and make people want to spend some time with your printed magazine?
Do you think some of it leans into, you know, because also there's like the rise of vinyl again, and there's a bit of an argument actually for CDs and sort of and I
don't believe that. Look, CDs are not coming back.
I don't know. I'm fighting the cause. I don't know. I think you know, I think with streaming and things that you don't own, people are starting to realize that things can disappear off of stuff that they apparently own in a digital sense.
Oh.
And it's, I don't know, there's a few articles I'll send you. We'll have to have another discussion about this one. But I just, the whole thing of like having something now that's kind of tangible. If you're going to have something tangible, then you want it to be well put together and of quality and perhaps beautiful. And I do think that plays into the publications that you seem to have under your roster, because they're all sort of very attractive looking. They've got like really interesting art and things like that. How do you go about choosing what becomes, you know, part of the Stack family? You know, is it this sort of constant quest to find the weird and wonderful titles out there? Are there certain criteria that the publications have to meet before you take them on?
Well, I mean, so obviously there's a basic level of quality in terms of the editorial, the design, the production of the magazine. Like, you know, as you said, we want to send out something that is an object that you want to keep. So really, it's, you know, it's not just the case of the words and pictures on the page. It's how all of that is brought together into a package that hopefully you'll want to read and then stick it on your shelf and come back to in 10 years' time or something. So that's kind of the, you know, that's like sort of the basic level that, you know, there's going to be that level of quality. Aside from that, the thing that our subscribers tell us is that they want to be surprised. So that means that month on month, and I work about 6 months ahead with Stack. So, you know, kind of we've got an idea of what we're sending out in January next year, and I'm now starting to plan ahead from then on. So month on month, I'll make sure that, like, if we've just sent out a food magazine, for example, then we're not going to send another food magazine for, I don't know, 12 months or something. If we have just sent something out from, say, like China, then, like, you know, I'm going to try and go somewhere else. So basically, like, it means that every month when our envelope kind of drops through your door, and you've got no idea what's going to be inside there, and on opening it, hopefully you get a nice surprise of like, okay, I would never have come across this before. So, and to be honest, like, you know, because these magazines, most of them, I'd say, publish, say, like maybe twice a year, maybe once a year, there are a few that will be quarterly. I don't think we do any really that are more frequent than that. So basically, like once you take that really quite kind of infrequent publishing schedule into account, it sort of built itself. Sort of like when you slot one in and you see that, oh, I'd love to send this magazine out, but it's going to be too similar to what went out 2 months before, so we're going to have to wait another 6 months for it coming out. That kind of slow accumulation through the year, like sort of, it sort of built itself really.
It feels a little bit like a slow living thing. I don't know if you come across that term, but it's like trying to slow everything down, and maybe it also plays into not just having something tangible, but the sort of perhaps the rise of people thinking about self-care and mental health and digital detox, taking breaks away from monitors and etc. People say go and read, go and walk, etc. And it feels like it plays into that, trying to slow us all down a little bit and make us kind of appreciate things. Take our time.
I definitely couldn't say that was the idea in the first place, but this and several other things that have kind of come through while running Stack over the years are kind of like being happy accidents, but I guess are related to the original point of, we're basically all kind of, there was a big worry a few years ago about online echo chambers, and, kind of like we're all getting our own prejudices just like played back at us. And Stack was always intended as an antidote to that before we even really knew that it was a thing that we had to be worried about, because guess what? It's just a good idea to open yourself up to things that you wouldn't ordinarily come across. And also like, kind of the digital detox and the self-care stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Like Stack was always intended as like, we're going to send you this magazine. And then, there's some statistic that like the average decision to buy a magazine is taken in sort of like 30 something seconds, because that's how long it takes to like flip through in a shop and decide yes or no. And that honestly doesn't really work very well for a lot of these magazines, because they're a bit strange. They don't immediately offer themselves up as like, hi, this is what I'm all about. So with Stack, this magazine can sit on your bedside table for 3 weeks until you've got a bit of time to come to it, and then it's ready and waiting for you. So yeah, I mean, again, I definitely wouldn't say that any of this was part of the plan at the start, but you can see how it comes out of what the initial plan was.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess to give an example, I mean, you wrote a piece for MediaCat a while back that showcased a couple of the publications that you got. Correct me if I pronounce these wrong, but Solomia and Blood. I think, both which kind of focus on the Russia-Ukraine war from different perspectives. They felt sort of inspiring in a kind of heartbreaking way, to me at least. Were they quite close to your heart? How were those two received?
Yeah, totally. Look, I mean, they are both really extraordinary magazines. So as you said, they both came out of the war in Ukraine. Solomia is a Ukrainian magazine, which is made by young Ukrainian people, kind of giving their account of the war. And Blood is made from the Russian side, but it's dissenting Russians who are basically, they're very careful to say, really, we're not the ones suffering here. Like, they're like, we're not the ones who are being killed, but actually this conflict it's the end of our country as we know it. And they're literally in the magazine calling for their, the end of Russia as we know it, and the start of like a new era. Both of them are amazing magazines, and I think amazing partly for what print does so well in terms of like creating this artifact of a time. They're in 10 years' time, we'll be able to look back on those magazines and see what people were thinking in the moment about this conflict. We didn't actually send those out to our subscribers because they're too big. they're both like great big slabs of magazines. But that's the sort of stuff that I'll really happily promote through the Stack blog and like in other places, because I want to make sure that as many people as possible see this stuff and get hold of it. And I'm actually really looking forward to, there's a conference in Hamburg in September where I'm going to be interviewing the team from Solomia on stage. So really looking forward to kind of getting into the sort of like the details with them about like what they're doing with that magazine.
Well, that sounds really cool. Yeah, I have to get some more details about that. Yeah, perhaps we send you there as a roving reporter if you want to write some stuff for MediaCat, maybe. I wanted to ask, like, does it ever surprise you the titles that prove popular versus the ones that you thought were going to go down well versus the ones that are less of a hit with subscribers? Like, you think, oh, this is a sure thing, or this one is a bit weird. I don't think anyone's going to really. This one's a slow burn or something. Does that happen quite often?
Well, I mean, look, like, first of all, we don't really tend to get a strong response from people saying, I don't like this. I mean, obviously, like, some people sometimes don't like the magazine we send them, and that's like understood. That's fine. But part of the point of Stack is, as I said, like, you're opening yourself up to something new. And so, yeah, we don't tend to get a lot of people coming back saying, like, this is just not for me. I think that, have you heard of the term audience capture? So there's a zine that I read just recently, and actually I wrote about it on the Stack site. And it's this idea that the creator becomes kind of enthralled to the audience. And this is something that, I mean, basically, like, social media is kind of engineered for, because it gives you like feedback straight away. And so, how many times have you sat there trying to perfectly frame a picture for Instagram and then like agonizing over the caption and then feeling completely distraught when it gets like 30 likes and so like that's audience capture writ large. And actually with Stack, we just don't have that. Like there's no kind of, well, I guess the signal that comes back is when people say, actually, I want to unsubscribe from this service. And again, understood that can happen. That's fine. But for the people who subscribe to Stack and stay with us, like, they want the weird stuff. Like they want the stuff they wouldn't have picked up. So no, we don't, honestly, we don't tend to get that.
Yeah, sort of like a mystery box thing, isn't it? I suppose you run the risk, obviously, because you get something you really, really love, and then something that you just be like, I would never have expected. I would have never picked this up myself. I was wondering if we could talk about subscribers a little bit. Like, who subscribes generally? Are there any sort of common characteristics? Are they largely people in creative jobs, or are there, just lots of random people?
Yeah. No. So about half our subscribers are in the creative industries, and a quarter of our subscribers are designers. So, kind of, it just makes sense. Like, if you're someone who wants to have regular inspiration coming across your desk, you will subscribe to Stack. You can probably claim that as like an expense against tax. So you're essentially, getting it for free, whatever. And so they're like designers are a big part of our audience. And we are very slightly more female than male. And like, we're mainly in the UK, but then outside that, US is our next biggest audience, and then Europe. But I mean, we send stuff all over the world. So yeah, I don't think any of this is particularly enlightening, to be honest. I always wish there was something that I could say that's like, yes, well, our subscribers are like this person. That's not what we expect. But it's creative people who want to see something that they wouldn't otherwise have got hold of.
Yeah, like get inspiration, etc. Yeah, I often find that if I'm out and about and I don't know, you see a specialist kind of magazine shop, I'm always like, ooh, and then I nearly always just wander in and just have a quick scan, quick look around. I'd love to have more magazines, but I have such a small flat. It's kind of genuinely over the pandemic, just trying to get rid of things more than accumulate them. But it's really frustrating because of like my colleagues, which do subscribe. They're always sort of, when we have little Zoom calls, they're always sort of showing me magazines and saying how much they love them. I think one of the ones they recently really loved is, I think the most recent one, Humble Pie.
Yes, yeah. It was issue 3 of Cake Zine, which we'll call Humble Pie. So Cake Zine is this kind of phenomenon from Brooklyn that launched out of the pandemic. So it was kind of formulated in the pandemic. First issue launched at the start of last year, and it was a magazine all about cake, and it was specifically sexy cake. And then issue 2 was Wicked Cake, and they launched that just in time for Halloween last year. And then we've just sent out issue 3, and they pivoted away from cake to pie. And so, yeah, as you say, this issue is humble pie.
I think what the most interesting thing to me was, though, it's not just going, I don't know, here's a pie. It was like sort of the many, many different ways that you could link an article to pie, whether you were talking about, I don't know, music or something. It was kind of, there were some really surprising ways, I thought. And it was really fascinating.
Look, I mean, that's kind of what these magazines are as a whole, right? These magazines are always about niches within niches. So if you've got someone out there who's like, well, I just love food, but nobody's speaking about it in this particular way that means something to me, that's kind of the nucleus of a project like this. And obviously that could be expressed in all sorts of different ways. It could be like a podcast or I don't know, like a YouTube channel. But it just so happens that some people want to have the characteristics of a small, beautiful, independent magazine.
That makes sense. I wanted to ask, we're sort of, running out of time soon, coming to the end of our chat, but I wanted to talk about briefly AI, and I wondered, it seems to be coming for the creative industries, and I wondered if you've had that experience or, it's touching on your world at all, sort of whether that's art produced for magazines or, I don't know, producing the articles themselves or the photography that goes in them. How much of a concern is AI in terms of sort of the independent magazine kind of space?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a concern. Again, partly comes down to it is very difficult to make like a profitable business out of running a small independent magazine. So basically, the people who are making these magazines are fundamentally doing it because they love it, because they've got something that they really passionately want to say. And some of them, for sure, will turn to AI as a way of helping them to do that. But I would say that none of them will turn to AI just because it's like a cheaper, faster way of helping them to do that. And so, kind of like, obviously, I guess with AI, those are the two, that's kind of the big selling point. It's like, kind of you can get this material, this content cheaper and faster than you get elsewhere. So if you're in a business which is profit driven, then you can see how that might give you a benefit. Whereas if you're in a business which is kind of driven by your love for it, then you're only going to use that technology if that somehow helps you to kind of like get further into a subject and investigate it more. And if that's what you're doing with it, then I'd like to see it. But I mean, the Midjourney launched a printed magazine recently. I haven't seen it personally, but we have a Stack Discord server, and somebody on there posted a video of it, and all the comments were just about like how kind of underwhelming it is. And I mean, look, guess what? If you take a bunch of images that have been created and just stick them on print, like that doesn't make it special. There isn't something like kind of inherently interesting about the fact it's been printed. There needs to be some thought behind it. There needs to be something that's kind of giving that thing a reason to exist.
Yeah, it puts me in mind of, it's interesting you say about the Midjourney thing. It puts me in mind of some screenwriter forums that I'm on where there was a fairly notable screenwriter was arguing that, AI could write a screenplay. It would write a 3 out of 5 star movie, perfectly serviceable film. That's as good as it could get to. So, anything that's beyond that, that's really digging into the human experience, your 4 or 5 star movies that kind of blow you away, it wouldn't be able to do that. And that was the sort of argument. It was like, it could give you something serviceable, sure, but beyond that, there's a reason humans do things, and there's a reason why we respond to them. And especially, like you say, if you're making something out of love and passion, not sure AI is going to be able to do that for you. I know it's a huge topic, and I just wanted to quickly touch on it and scan over it. Couple of final questions. I just wondered what beyond AI, whether that's a trend or not, I don't know. But any other sort of trends and behaviors that you're seeing in the magazine industry right now? I mean, as an overall thing, I read recently that the magazine industry is kind of up a little bit. It's growing as opposed to some other sort of areas of print.
Well, I mean, I think that always that always sort of depends on where you draw your lines. And I'm always just suspicious of anyone who tries to tell you anything about independent magazines, including me, because look, the whole point of independent magazines is that they're off out there doing their own thing. Like there's no kind of like industry body that brings them all together. There's no like, they're not like audited. So we can say like for sure how many they are and like how many they're selling. And so this stuff is always kind of like, stick a finger in the wind. I think, I mean, maybe there are more magazines these days than there used to be. I wouldn't be able to point to a number to tell you that for sure. That I would say very generally, I think that magazines are getting, or independent magazines are getting a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter than they used to be. And there used to be, it used to be sort of a cliche of independent magazines that they were like these big, heavy, luxurious magazines, and there'd be like lots of white space. And that was a reaction against what was happening in the mainstream. So, the consultants have kind of like come into the mainstream magazines and said, okay, you need to like drop your pagination, use thinner paper, basically cut costs wherever you could. So you've got a bunch of people who are working in that industry who make their own magazine and say, well, this is what I really want to do, that, so make something big and lavish and luxurious. These days, I mean, like paper is like really expensive at the moment. Also, I think there's a much greater awareness of the environmental impacts of not just like making the magazine, but like shipping it around the place. Shipping is like crazy expensive. So there are just lots of reasons why people would want to make a slightly smaller and lighter magazine. And actually, I was never excited by a magazine because of like how big and heavy it was. I've always been excited by the magazine because of the idea that's in there, or like, the way it's expressing that idea. And I think it's really interesting that like, you can actually make just as big an impact with a smaller, lighter magazine as you can with a bigger, heavier magazine. It's interesting to see the different ways that people are choosing to express themselves. But yeah, as I said, like, in a way that is maybe a bit more environmentally and financially sustainable.
And that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to finish, actually. We've mentioned a couple of the titles. There was the Humble Pie cake one, and Solomir and Blood. I just wondered if you had to sort of mention three magazines that sort of showcase the weird and wonderful at Stack. What would you go for beyond the ones we've mentioned already?
Oh my goodness!
I know it's favoritism, but
I actually this morning I just published a blog post on 10 of our favorite independent magazines, and that was specifically looking at the ones that have been around for a long time, because I spend a lot of my time. I think magazines generally are just kind of like fixated on the new, like it's always sort of like the new issue. What's the new thing that's coming out? So I put this post together, which is looking at 10 magazines that have been around for a good few years, and really kind of like honing what they've done. So I'd say like picking from that list, there's a magazine called MacGuffin, which is based out of Amsterdam, which chooses a different object each issue to kind of like tell its stories about. And they just weave the most kind of like lovely and affecting stories out of, I mean, in this case, a log. So it's all about logs, but like, they've done like the ball, the bed, the rug. So they're, all these kind of inanimate objects that are often overlooked, they kind of get their place to shine in this magazine. What else have we got in there? There's a music magazine called Zweikomma7, which is a Swiss magazine of like contemporary music. And for their latest issue, they have kind of like, they're very sort of like preoccupied with ideas of like longevity. And, like they've been going for like, 10 plus years, always trying to kind of reflect on the contemporary moment. And they're sort of like interested in the impossibility of this task they set themselves. And so they're doing like crazy things, like kind of, they run the editor's letter one line at a time across the top of each page for like 50 or 60 pages. So you basically get like, to read the editor's letter, you get sort of like more than halfway through the magazine, which gives you this like strange, disorienting sort of like experience of like seeing the magazine before you actually read it. It's just, I love the fact that they are just as experimental and enthusiastic as the artists who are featured on their pages. And I think that says a lot about what makes them so special. I've got one left, haven't I? Who am I going to say? There's a magazine called Dirty Furniture, which is all about design as it leaves the showroom. So basically, this magazine started with the observation that when you read about design, it tends to be in this kind of like sterilized, disembodied way. So like, kind of, let's look at these beautiful design objects and appreciate all the work that's gone into it. But they want to look at it when it actually starts being used by people and getting dirty and getting like messed up. And so their last issue was the phone, and it was like totally fascinating, like looking at all the different ways that like the telephone sort of like weaves through our lives. And this was like starting as a 6-issue project, and their last issue is due out at the end of this year. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they can do with that.
Well, they all sound amazing. I especially love the furniture one. That sounds very cool. I accidentally stumbled into a mid-century furniture part of TikTok, and yeah, I'm slightly obsessed with it now. So, but yeah, stuff in the real world is really fascinating. Yeah, we've covered a lot, but we've come to the end of our time. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the Media Cat Magazine podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for taking the time.